Let's piece these broken pieces together. All right, guys, this is the season finale of season 1, episode 21. Don't forget to subscribe, follow, like on my YouTube channel. It'll help me out greatly. My name is Pej, your host, as always. There are only a handful of people, not even, that I would have considered for the finale episode of this podcast. And if you all know, going all the way back to episode 1, Dean, he was one of those handful, and this gentle person is going to be another. And I wanted to end season 1 with him because he's been a longtime friend, A, and B, he has been living in the Bay Area for quite some time. Arizona born, however, so we're going to maybe get into some basketball talk as well. But he's none other than Mishkin Faustini. How you doing, bud?
I'm doing well. Thank you for the warm introduction.
I could have been warmer, but, I figured that's enough. No, man. I wanted to talk to you today and kind of get in depth talk. And I will preface all of this by disclosing that we're definitely not experts on this topic, but Mishkin here has had plenty of living experience in the Bay Area. So we wanted to talk about the market out there and including the housing markets specifically. But the economy and regarding the millennials and cost of living and all of that. So I wanted to get into all of that with you today. How long now have you been living in the Bay Area? I know you were living in Berkeley initially, but now you're still in the Bay Area, a little more east.
Yeah, I've been here for 25 years now, which seems like quite a long time. So
yeah,
moved here when I was a kid and lived in Stanford, Palo Alto, Pleasanton, Berkeley, Davis. We went to Davis together. So kind of been around the Bay, a lot of different areas. So
yeah. So you've witnessed the dream area of the Bay kind of financially turn into nightmare as far as the expenses go, huh? But that's 25 years. That's a long time, man. I mean, we can discuss, we know some people who own homes, elder people who own homes. You mean your in-laws even are I mean, they bought it at such an opportune time, you would think, because like I'm guessing it was mid 90s when they purchased their properties there, and that's when Bay Area houses were still like you could still look at them without pulling your hair out. But it was, and I mean, it's a win, right? But who would have known, right, that it would have spiked this high? Let's start there. What do you think the reason is? I mean, there's some obvious ones, but specifically, like, what is the leading cause of the spike in pricing over there?
yeah, it's a great question. I mean, the answer is somewhat obvious, but before I kind of get into that,
Yeah,
I feel like when I think about the housing prices, I think about when we first moved to the Bay. We lived in a house that was, I think, by most standards, a fairly modest house in terms of maybe it wasn't huge. It wasn't anything too spectacular. It wasn't anything that grand. It was a decent house in Palo Alto, and we lived there for a while. I stayed there with my cousins. We were living all together for a period of time. So, and it was a fun place to be. And I didn't think much of it, but as we moved to different parts of the Bay, and then years passed, I went back and I kind of looked at the value increase of some of the first homes that we rented. And some of these homes went from being probably worth, a matter of hundreds of thousands of dollars. And now if you look at those same properties, they're worth astronomically higher value. So I think I checked that particular house in Palo Alto, and that same house was worth $4-5 million now. So, which sounds crazy to me because, in my mind, I would have to say I've lived in a $5 million house, which is, it absolutely does not jive with the experience I had. Like, it's not like I felt like I lived in a $5 million house. It is just an artifact of the market condition that has kind of led to this kind of astronomical valuation for homes. But crazy. To kind of go back to your question, what has led to that increase in value? Well, the kind of fact is, the Bay Area has done extremely well because of the growth of the tech sector. So this is a very unique area of the country where jobs have been plenteous. The pay in a lot of the jobs have been quite strong, and there's a lot of equity packages that come with a lot of these jobs. So it is it's a very fortunate place in the country, and it has prospered through the years. But even the most simple assessment would kind of lead you to kind of be curious about these values, because when you think of the amount of money people have earned from that time to now, well, it's not like salaries have gone up 5x in the US. But how can a home price be 5 times as high and still have people continuing to purchase them and buy into them and believe in that value increase for the future? It sort of boggles the mind.
So yeah, I mean, you said that the job opportunities there, they're the compensations are for at least the tech companies are for the most part comparable to the price spikes of the homes. But not everybody, we know a lot of people who aren't in tech, right? And they're living out there, or they're trying to live out there, especially the millennials, right? So how do we, first of all, this spike, gravity works for everything, right? So whatever goes up eventually has to go down. Now I know that the prices the overall slope has been going up. However, there's fluctuations slightly, but it's not, I don't know if it's enough to make sense for someone to be putting in that much money for a home, right? Especially with a non competitive salary, right? So it's how does that, what's your experience with that, or knowing people that are not in that field? How do they deal with that?
Well, I don't think the tech sector's wage growth has been like in alignment with the increase in the value of these sorts of things. I mean, one thing that we do know is that debt across the board has gone up substantially. You know, whether it's homes, student loans, all the various kinds of debt, credit debt.
Yeah.
And so the the magnitude of risk that people are taking on is increasing. So I think even for the people who are doing relatively well in the Bay Area, which is again kind of a very unique situation. So it's kind of unfair just to talk about the Bay Area because it is unique, but even for the people who are doing well, it still is, very difficult, I think, for a lot of people to get into a house, to buy a house, right? There's extreme competition, tons of money being put in.
Yeah.
And also, the competition isn't just with people who are, trying to buy their first home. I think people are trying to buy, their second, third home. So,
yeah.
And sometimes these homes aren't even getting used, right? They're just investment vehicles for people who are looking to increase their wealth. So
we're talking about investors that are buying up a lot of these properties in the Bay Area, and that in itself is alarming because how many investors do we know, right, that can do that? Like you said, a lot of us are just trying to get our first homes, and you have to compete with these, probably like closer to the top 1% of wealth that you're competing against. And I mean, I heard recently there was a house in the Bay. I can't remember what part, but it went $1 million over asking price. Like, that's insane. Like, how do you compete with that, right?
Yeah, and sometimes those are, all cash offers. Sometimes those are, no contingencies on those offers. So they're basically willing to buy some of these houses without even ever walking into them, because the competition can be so strong. So, I mean, my point is it's annoying and terrible for all people, but particularly bad for people who aren't in this sector of the economy. What about the people who are, minimum wage earners and people in different areas of the economic sphere? How are they possibly able to make their, their home? How are they, possibly going to start their family? How are they going to be able to do any of the things that we all grow up believing will be part of, our future, and the American dream that we, kind of were told about growing up?
It's crazy. I mean, that's the thing though, right? That's what I was referring to, like the non, competitive salaries, right? Those are the ones I'm like, and there's a lot of them. Yeah. So it's kind of, I mean, first of all, I know many people who were formerly living in the Bay Area, and, and they basically decided, and I mean, from my field of teaching music, I was commuting, right? Myself, I can speak for myself. Yeah, I would have loved to live in a city like San Ramon, right? But it was just unrealistic. And it was like, and I had so many students in San Ramon, right? But I realized that spending 4 hours on a day driving was actually substantially better financially than trying to like live out there, right? I mean, Shada and I would, when she first moved to Sacramento area where I am, she was, we were toying with that idea of, hey, let's go look at homes in San, and it was just like, yeah, this is comparably speaking, like, I mean, at some point you want to enjoy your life and not have to deal with oh, I gotta work around the clock just to be able to pay for the location, right? So a lot of people, I mean, I never actually committed to living in the Bay Area, so I stuck with that, and it actually screwed up my back long term because I from all the driving, I always thought it was sports, but eventually, due to the pandemic, I was forced to work from home, and all the PT that I got was like not fixing it while I was making these long commutes, and I always thought it was from like working out wrong or whatever, or like at the gym. And my physical therapist would give me all these stretches and exercises and like all these suggestions, and none of them would work. And then I just worked from home for like a year, and all of a sudden my pain was gone. I'm like, and then I put two and two together, and I talked to my PT again. I was like, could it be my driving? And then she was like, well, yeah. And then I tested it, right? I like drove again for a week, and it started to come back, and I was like, all right, that's it. That's the one. So
Yeah, I think that's super interesting because that's kind of like the side of this situation, the economic situation which we're presented with in around the world, really, but particularly in the United States, is it has so many unseen ramifications that go flying under the radar that I think are interesting things to kind of assess. For instance, I think there's a lot of people who defer doing a lot of things that they kind of expect to do in their life because they're not ready to embark on something because of a financial reason. I'm in too much debt to do XYZ. I'm not ready to buy a house, so I'm, going to put off getting married until I can, get a better job and improve my situation. There's a whole like number of things I think that are going on that we can't really assess from, every one of them, but interesting effects of the economic condition that we have here. And I think, I think I've thought about this, and I think the millennial generation, I know we were talking about the millennial generation and economics in general. Our generation is, I think, the first generation of Americans whose standard of living is actually decreasing from our parents in the last, like, I don't know, it's like 150, 200 years or something crazy.
wow. Yeah.
So they kind of like, I think our generation has been the first to kind of really begin to question the status quo of what's going on around us. Like, is this a sustainable society? Is this like how life is meant to be? Why am I struggling to do X, Y, Z? And at the same time, we're questioning this condition that we're experiencing. I think the prior generations, particularly the boomer generation, the baby boomer generation,
Yeah.
is they're kind of the ones who have led us, I think, to where we are right now, and I think they are happy with the status quo because it's been quite favorable to them.
Mm-hmm.
Right, their economic condition has been improved drastically, but for us, if you grew up around our time frame,
Yeah.
we've basically experienced three major economic downturns in our youth and adulthood.
Right.
The one in 2000, the dot-com crash,
Yeah.
the 2008 housing crash, and once again in the pandemic, the crash that basically happened in March, April timeframe. So
Right.
for us, I think it's, we're seeing problems in what's going on, and I think it would be interesting to hear, your thoughts on what is it that we can do to kind of change the situation. What are the aspects of this that aren't right?
Move to Thailand. No, I was just kidding. But I mean, seriously though, like, I didn't even think about the .com of 2000, right? That you mentioned. That's also there. Yeah, I mean, the pandemic and the crash of 2008 are still substantial because we're kind of still dealing with the ramifications of 2008, and then the pandemic kind of added to that. But that's what's crazy to me. I mean, yeah, the boomers generation, like you said, is they were adults at the perfect time, I would say, right? If there is such a word as perfect for that. But they were, at least it was a favorable financial situation for all of them, so they were able to tap in on a favorable price in favorable areas like the Bay Area, and the I guess to answer your question, what I think about this whole situation. I mean, it's going to eventually have to fall on its head, right? Because I mean, is it the real question to ask is how severe will it be, right? How severe will the downfall be? Because we just discussed earlier that the people that are buying, are either investors or they've had a substantial amount of money saved to be able to purchase something semi-stress free, right? So but that's a small percentage, man. We know that because unfortunately, I mean, the sad reality is the boomer generation are getting older, right? And they're and that's the reality of it, is that we're going to be the ones that when we're in our 60s and 70s, like, what's life going to be like for us at that point? And where's the market going to be, in the Bay Area? And by the way, Sacramento is next, right? I can see it coming this way, right? Like, I was lucky that I had family in this part of California, or this side of the Bay, far enough that the prices were not that comparable yet, but they're going up. I mean, we're looking for a house right now, and it's crazy, which doesn't make sense because the pandemic, you would think, I mean, and you might be able to offer an explanation on this, but in my head, I thought the pandemic slows down the market, but it's actually, because people lost their jobs. A lot of people did, unfortunately, and people had to deal with, applying for grants through the state or the federal system. The stimulus and all of that is there for a reason. It means the numbers were so high that the government actually had to step in and help. I mean, how much help, that's up for debate, but it's the government, to be quite frank, they kind of work slower, right? So they don't. So when they've realized that they gotta help, it's bad, right? It's gotten so bad that the government has to say, all right, let's step in and help out these Americans. So I guess what I'm saying is that, when it falls on its head, and Sacramento going up, and eventually it's going to go to other states, because right now I know a lot of my own students have moved out of the Bay Area, right? They've taken whatever they could get from their homes, which is substantial, and they've converted it to like a mansion in Texas, or moved over to Arizona, and a substantial upgrade. So, you know, at what point does the housing market in the Bay and consequently just Northern California gonna have to turn down and go, you know, make the prices go down again and make it affordable again? What are your thoughts on that?
I don't think anyone can predict the future, and anyone who says they can is probably not right. But I think you're right in the sense that in the last year during the pandemic, we've seen very, very odd conditions in the market where at the beginning of the pandemic, stocks, equities were falling extremely fast. And there was a sharp downturn that managed to correct itself within like a month or two after, you know, massive stimulus had been passed by the government. And so yet again, you know, the government has to come in and basically provide trillions of dollars to the market to kind of jumpstart or maybe, you know, shock the system back into life. And that's the sad kind of reality of what is going on in our economy. It sort of is on life support, right? Even to this day, we still have a massive amount of money being injected into the economy.
Yeah.
And that talk of how, you know, do we pull this money out has been on the table for so long. You know, after 2008, it was 10 years of basically 0% interest rates, right? And that is because the government is trying to encourage this growth in the economy, encourage inflation.
Yeah.
And now, you know, what I'm hearing and what I'm seeing is during the last year, we saw companies that were bankrupt.
Yeah.
Like had no money, but their stock prices were rising rapidly. So that's just kind of crazy. I mean, think about it. I think it was, for instance, like Budget or one of the car rental companies. I can't remember which one it was now, but they're basically straight up bankrupt. And yet a lot of people were buying their stock and the stock price was increasing. And that should not happen in a healthy economy. But that same effect where, you know, certain assets are increasing in value is happening across the board. And it's kind of devoid of rational reasoning or traditional understanding of how these things should work. But so in a sense, I think the end game for this kind of game of speculation is not a good one. You're right. Like, I think there is going to be a downturn, and I'm not sure, you know, what parts of the economy will be worst hit, if it's going to be housing, stocks, this, that, the other. And I don't know when, but I definitely can see that at the end of this game, you know, those who have been making silly investments will basically have to have their comeuppance, right? Like there's,
yeah, and even that's sad to talk about because, you know, like it's not like there's any joy in seeing that, right? You know, you never want. For me personally, I don't, even the wealthy, like, you know, there's no ill will towards any of them, and I, like, even, you know, when that day comes, like, I hope that they're protected to a degree, right? Like, I don't want them to be feeling the effects of that. I don't want anybody to be feeling it ultimately, but there is a reality to all of this, right? So it's this game, and that's a good way to describe it. It is a game, but when you're talking about this and talking about the stock prices of broke businesses going up. What are your thoughts on that? What do you associate that to? Like, how is that happening despite the financial crisis of the company?
Yeah, I think, I think the anecdotally, the story that I've heard, and I don't have like, the statistics to back it up,
Okay.
but what I've heard is that a lot of people who were home during the pandemic, didn't have anything to do, downloaded Robinhood and started buying things that they knew by name, right? Things that had brand names that were familiar for people their whole life growing up. Right. So GameStop is
Yeah.
the most popular one out of those AMC movies, right? So companies that were struggling during the pandemic, and so somehow, whether it's from Reddit or other sources, people have come together collectively and decided that, I think basically what happened is, in their own minds, they recognize this is completely a game. Like, none of this economic condition we're in is based on what's good, what's just, what's right. Right. We've seen 3 major downturns in our lifetime, and many of us have been, hosed in the process of some of these downturns. Meanwhile, the people who have benefited the most are generally those who already were doing well, right? People who were able to buy their second, third home when that, housing crisis really hit. And now the value of those homes tripled, by doing almost nothing in comparison to, what it takes to do a day job. So I think a lot of people recognize this is a bit of a game. And so if this is a game, why wouldn't I play it? Why wouldn't I go on Reddit and find, everyone's going to buy GameStop stock or options tomorrow, and this is what they're saying to do. Okay, if we can collectively do something together, all of a sudden this irrational thing will work out in our favor instead of in the favor of a Wall Street titan or something, right?
Yeah.
So I think
yeah, but like, how does, like, I mean, I'm guilty of that, right? I did that. I'm not even gonna use the word guilty, but like, I participated, right? And the whole Wall Street bets and all of that. And it do you see the rising of the I don't even know what to call them, like this collective group of majority of the country, let's just stick to the country, right? Majority of this nation, like, kind of fit that Wall Street bets bill, that like they can play that game, right? Like, against the upper 1% or the wealthy, or these companies that, like we said, are struggling, but then we've literally been able to, by buying their stocks, like, have been able to keep them afloat, right? And it's how long can that go on, right? Because even Robinhood got in trouble for it, right? Because they started to monitor it and they started to do some shady things in the process that they got called out on. And they're not the only app, other apps also, but we're just talking about that Robinhood for now. So how long can that happen? Is that actually going to lead to any substantial change in the market?
Is investing in these
companies that are struggling, but the bigger picture being that more and more millennials, let's just say, are participating in this, and they're putting their hard-earned money into it, and they're seeing GameStop, for example, turn around in their value.
Yep.
Right? Like, can we attribute that eventually to like big house companies that buy, you know, many acres of land and put their houses on? Can it have effects ultimately on companies like that?
Well, I think if you had bought a house in, 2007 at the peak of the values, let's say March of 2007,
Yeah.
you would have paid a really high price because, the market had such a huge demand that was basically fueled on by excessive lending practices. And then by 2008, 1 year later, you would have been looking at the value of your property and you would have been in total shambles, right? You would have been like, wow, I bought this maybe for twice the price and now it's worth less. Maybe I'm even underwater in my loan. And the whole story, I think we're told in growing up in America is that, investing is an important part of, how you need to deal with your finances. Buying a home is a solid investment.
Yeah.
You can't go wrong there, right? Like no matter what, the value is going to go up. That's kind of the sentiment that you hear.
Yeah.
And so for those people who bought a home, 1 year later, they're underwater. How can you tell those people who have lost maybe hundreds of thousands of dollars, who maybe lose their home, their family is put out, how can you tell that person that that investment is a good one, but buying, something else is a bad one, right? So I think that there's almost like a rejection of like, you experts don't know what you're doing, right?
Yeah.
If we just stick together as a group, we can actually shape our own outcome, right? And that's what you guys are really doing, right? If you look at, how some of these deals have taken place from, Wall Street firms, they're really kind of like obviously in helping each other, incentivizing each other to help boost their own condition, right?
Yeah.
And so why shouldn't people, play this game in the same way, in whatever way that can work? It just so happens that people found GameStop as one way to kind of be able to win at the game, right? It's not, I don't think it's a good investment. I don't think anyone thinks that, it's a sustainable thing forever.
So was it more of a rebellious investment, kind of?
Kind of. It was like, I know I can basically win in this particular situation.
Yeah.
And so why wouldn't
the formula
I?
works. Yeah, the formula is going to work. But I guess as you said, GameStop long term is not a advisable investment, right? However, why not be able to turn that on to other companies that the people want, right? The majority that actually support, right? Not what the people at the top are recommending or shoving down our throats. Oh, you should do this. Like you said, buying a house, great idea, right? Where did that all come from? Like I wouldn't be surprised if that all, was sparked from the top to condition people to start doing this, right? And many unfortunately fell for that. And then the crash happened in 2008. And then, they suffered as a result. And I know we can't predict the future, like we said, but I guess to bring it, in more like kind of zoom in on a micro approach as far as like how you and I are dealing with it, because there are many millions that are in the similar condition as us, right? So how do we I guess I should ask more specifically because we were talking about the Bay. Um, do you have a time limit that like a subconsciously, are you like, I can deal with waiting for this right timing to buy for only so long, right? How's that before? I guess I'm asking, like, has the idea of leaving the Bay Area at a certain point down the road, if you don't see improvements, right? And I guess what has that crossed your mind, A, and then B, if it hasn't, what specifically are you looking for as a good time if you're looking to buy? Because some people don't even care to buy anymore. That's why I'm asking, right? Like, is like buying is at this point, especially in the Bay, is a shot in your financial butt, you know. So what do you so like what I just want to get in your head on that, like, what, you know, because I made it clear on my end. I played around with the idea of moving to San Ramon, but quickly realized it's not feasible, and you know, I wanted to still do more living than working, so that's what led me to not want to do that, and Shada as well. But you know, Sacramento is nice and it's coming up, so we're happy here. But yeah, what about you?
Well, I think, yeah, absolutely. I think it would be foolish to not think about living in other places. Why? I think that there are pros and cons to each location, right? So you know, weather in Bay Area is great, right, compared to a lot of places that you could move to.
Right.
And I think there's a lot of pros to being here, and there's a lot of cons here as well. So yes, I've thought of, you know, different areas of living, but in general, I think when it comes to buying anything, it's really hard to time what is the optimal, you know, moment to make any purchase. So I don't think, you know, you can live your life based on that, but in general, I think the more fundamental thing that is something to ponder, I think, for everyone, is what is like the purpose of all of this kind of stuff we're doing, right? Like, it seems like you know, we live in a very materially prosperous area, and you know, in the United States in general, but you know, within the Bay Area even more so. But what is like the point of all of the material stuff that we have here? You know, is it better for us to live somewhere where it's a simpler life? Like, should we go, you know, live in areas where the towns are smaller? And I think during the pandemic, many people said, hey, I might as well do that. I can buy a nicer house, but live maybe a more simple life in a smaller town, something like that.
Especially those who were transitioned to online or working from home, because then it was easy to do that. You know, there's no reason to pay the mortgage you were paying in the Bay Area, and that
Right.
happened with my students, like I said. But continue.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there are a few reasons I think why people might want to live in an area, and obviously one is, you know, if your family's in that area, then that is a reason that is not insignificant, you know, that you may want to factor in. But in terms of actually like location wise, I can see very easily why people are kind of dispersing around the country into different areas. I know everyone talks about Texas as a place. I know I keep hearing people complaining about cost of living in California. And, oh, I'm going to move to Texas. There's no this tax, that tax, or, you know, some other place as well. So I think everyone is kind of starting to think along these lines, like, hey, why am I doing this? Why don't I go somewhere else? And that's an interesting thought for home buying in particular in the Bay Area. What's the effect that will have on prices? That's something I've thought about. Maybe you have some thoughts on that too. But if everyone is leaving, and if supposedly some companies have decided to relocate their headquarters to other areas, what effect will that have on the prices? In theory, you would think they would be going down, right?
Yeah.
We've been told that there's an exodus from California, and yet home prices have gone up. So it doesn't seem to me as if there's a much of an exodus if prices are going up. Of course, there's more than one factor there,
but I mean, I do see the prices going up maybe as like more of a temporary thing, like a shorter temporary move, perhaps from again, people that are controlling the market at the top. But ultimately, if they don't have anyone to either rent out those homes to or sell those homes to, because people are not going to pay it and they're going to go to Texas or Florida or Arizona, then yeah, I mean, the only logical thing is they'll have to drop their prices. But I guess the question is, how much lower the population of the Bay Area has to get to, like what is the threshold, right, before that happens. But I think even the prices going up right now throughout the country, but especially in the Bay Area, I think that is like kind of like I feel like it's a last ditch effort, right? It's like some home selling companies are trying to make up for what they couldn't make during the pandemic because everything was shut down. Investors it could be the same thing, private investors. But again, you said it earlier, the materialistic view of this country, and especially in the Bay Area from these big time investors, is there's got to be a consequence to all this, right? It's first of all, it's a game, so it's not real, right? We talked about that. So how long can we sustain this game without it getting to the end, or without you losing this game? And I'm talking about the people up top, not just, I mean, the people that we're referring to that are kind of more in our demographic. We've been dealing with the struggles for long enough, but I think one good thing about that is, and I'm not insinuating that people that are up top don't value this, but it's a reminder, more of a reminder for us that are at this level, to value something outside of material things a little more, right? Because like you said, family, like one reason to stay out there is family. And that's huge because there's no price you could put on that. Having that bond with family, having the bond with your significant other, or just traveling to a location for its scenic value, as opposed to going and just purchasing the finer things and all that, which there's nothing wrong with that. It's just half of some of those things are invaluable, and some of those things there's a tangible, like dollar amount that you can attach to it. You know what I mean? And I think, at least for me, I'm starting to see the value in the invaluables much more, right? The older I get. And maybe it's just because I'm getting old, but it's
Yeah.
but I think it's true though, right? What do you think? Is that this the escape from the Bay Area by many people, is that going to be the turning point, the final nail in the financial coffin?
I mean, I think that not just like forget Bay Area. I think in general, we're kind of on the cusp of, on the precipice of relearning what the economy should really be about. Right now, what we've been taught growing up is that we need to kind of fight to get our own, right? To serve our own needs. And if all of us just kind of go out of our way to fight for what we want and benefit our own material self, well, then that's the perfect economy. That's the premise behind our economy, really. And I think that has kind of been exposed to be quite flawed. And basically, we're reaching a point where it will no longer be tenable for this kind of economy to operate.
Yeah.
So we're doing everything we can to delay that. You know, trillions and trillions of dollars are being put into the economy.
It's a Band-Aid.
To kind of keep this thing going. And people are frantically kind of like, it's almost like a giant game of musical chairs. That's almost how I see it, where, you know, when the music stops, if you're the one who doesn't have a chair, you're out of the game.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what we're seeing in the economy, right? Those who kind of, when the fun stops, when the music stops, there are some who win and there are some who are losing. But this kind of understanding of the economy is sort of modeled after nature, right? Its premise is competition is the only thing that we should kind of factor into how we structure our economic activity and in relationships within society. And that is, in my opinion, a very flawed assessment of how we should do things, right? So I think what we will see in the coming years will be a move towards the idea that we have to do things in ways that aren't just looking out for our own needs, right? You're seeing it happen like baby steps at a time every day, right? We see a new desire to have a certain amount of our economy go towards like clean energy by a certain date, right? Like you see these small events and you don't really kind of make much of them because they seem kind of insignificant or like perhaps like things that are too idealistic or something like this. But slowly we're moving away from this concept of, United States, we do what's best for us, China, whatever other country, you do what's best for you. Because that is leading towards a conflict. And so I think, either we will face one of these conflicts, whether it's a war between countries or an issue of devastating, weather conditions that affect certain parts of the earth, which is already happening, but even more devastating, perhaps. Or we will figure out how to operate in a more cooperative manner with each other. That is kind of more intelligent way of structuring the economy in general. And I think that's that's the kind of duality that we face in the future. It's like maybe it's going to be some of this, maybe it's going to be some of that, but ultimately I think it will necessarily become less competitive and more of a cooperative relationship that we engage in between individuals, between communities, countries. And if we don't, there will be just massive ramifications. So I don't think we have a choice.
Yeah.
And I think it necessarily will have to go that direction. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, when you mentioned, on a grander scheme, national or international competition, right? And we've seen this movie before, and we've seen how it's turned out in the past, right? 99%, and that's just a number I'm throwing out there. It's not backed by actual statistics, but it's let's just say majority of international conflicts that lead to war, that lead to innocent people being enlisted or even volunteering to go into the military and fight these wars. That has all stemmed from some sort of greed, right? Some sort of hunger or thirst for having more power, money, notoriety, respect, which the last word respect, I think, is lost when you actually end up going to war. That's my opinion. But it's we've seen it happen. I mean, history can tell us this just by looking at the two world wars we've been through, right? That and a third one is looming at this point, right? It feels like, because of all, again, it's the same story, just told by different authors. It's and there's a saying that goes, it's okay to make mistakes, but and I'm paraphrasing this, but it's something along the lines of, when you continue to do the same thing and not get get the same result, the same undesired result, it's like the definition of insanity, right? So
Yeah.
and it's like, as nations, we're allowing this. And when I say as nations, I'm saying that the people that are actually citizens of these otherwise beautiful countries, right? Like, we're allowing this to continue by allowing the corrupt that are running the countries essentially into the ground, whether it's financial or even spiritually. I mean, when are we going to stop doing the same thing, or allowing the same story to replay and expect a different result, right? Eventually, like you said, it's going to have to be this unhealthy level of competition, because I don't believe that competition in itself is a bad thing, right? I think healthy competition is beautiful, right? And let's look at sports, right? And look, and it's a small example, but we can look at, and let's not even look at sports that are making substantial amount of money. Let's look at high school sports, right? Look at high school competition. You've seen it, I've seen it. The emotions, right, in those games, because that's all it is. It's just, there's only one goal. It's to beat the other team in that said sport, basketball, football, whatever it is. But the reward is great, but I've seen it many times where it was an amazing game that was played on both sides. Of course, by the end of the game, one team comes up short, right, of the higher score, or the winning score, and And I've seen how quickly those same athletes, non-paid athletes, run across to the losing team, the less fortunate team, and just embrace them and hold them, right? And hug them and connect with them in a level that is on a, and to me, like, that is the beauty of competition, right? That is the healthy way of competing. When you have empathy and when you have understanding and when you can feel for the other side, right? And when you're both aiming for that same cup, whatever the reward is at the end, right? You're aiming for it. There's, again, money isn't involved. That's why I'm focusing on non-paid competition. It's so pure, right? And it's beautiful to see. You know, it's like when we watch the Olympics or World Cup. There's so much more passion in that's required, because you're not motivated by how much money you're getting out of it, right? I'm not knocking like the pro sports that, you know, if you're great at something, why not be compensated for it? And if that's being a football player or a soccer player or a basketball player, but even that's fun to watch, right? As an audience member, right? But because there's something real and there's an intangible emotion that's transferred from the athletes on the court or on the field to the people viewing it, because we can connect it, right? We can connect to those emotions. So I don't think there's anything wrong with that, but there's cooperation within that competition. You see what I mean? There's cooperation within that. So now let's bring it back to competing governments. That is now where that cooperation, like you said, is gonna have to come back. Or if it was ever, and there might be countries out there, I'm not sure of any, but there are countries out there that I know they're doing great, right? But we rarely hear about them, right? I know Finland is great. Their education is top notch. Norway is, these countries aren't having the struggles like the United States is having, or some other countries that are comparable to the US. It's, we'd have to kind of zoom into their methods and see how they're dealing with their government. But ultimately, when you think about the people first, I think that's the first step. You have to think about the citizens and not think about whatever gets us to be number one. Like, that's where the competition becomes unhealthy, because you're now essentially ruining people's lives, whether through war or through different classes due to lack of opportunities, or any other thing that affects the people's health, be it physical or mental, which I think mental is even worse ultimately. But, so do you agree that, if it's centered on love for people, not just your own country's people, but the world, a world view of it, right? And I think spirituality plays into that.
Yeah, I think the sports example is a good one, because I do think that, I think sports are like an extremely positive thing for people to engage in, or just, to watch and to be a part of, because it's, I guess what I'm thinking of is the competition for individuals inside of a sports game. Let's say, like, you're playing basketball and you're on a team and you're competing in a league. Well, for you to be able to kind of bring out the best in yourself, you actually need somebody on the other side to play a role of being an extremely good competition, right? So it's almost as if the real competition is not actually with that person on the other side of the other side of the court. It's more of the almost a competition with yourself, right? Because you're trying to get better at the game, and in order to do that, you need them. You need that person to be there. So that is almost it's kind of a different form of competition, right? It's not a form of competition where I inherently need you to suffer in some, material way or physical, of course, losing is not fun,
Right.
but it is a part of improving yourself. So that is very different from the kind of competition that you see when you're like working in the economic system here, where in order for me to win, we have to destroy that competition. Like we have to make sure that their situation doesn't work, so that we can either gobble them up or they don't get to have any of the winnings, right? Like that's the mindset that you see in the business society, and also in the in the government arena too, right? Like we seem to have this conversation with China, where we have quite an antagonistic viewpoint of China. Oh, they're hurting us, so let's try hurt them back, right?
Right.
Which is ridiculous, because we're the ones who sent our jobs to China, right? So how can you be blaming them for having all the so my point is that this is a different
no, I
different form of competition, and this is an unhealthy competition. You're right. I think there needs to be a sense of spiritual values undergirding these things, right? In empathy, love, care, even justice, right? Like, is it just for me to buy a third home when somebody else doesn't even have a place to live? Like, that's, if you were to kind of like look at it in the economic sense that we've been told, the story we've been told, you would have to say, well, you earn that money, you have the right to do what you want, and they didn't do something right, it's their fault. Whatever their condition is, it's completely on them, and thus, it's your duty to maximize your own self gain. This is a form of competition where that person and myself are maybe interested in a house, except for me to win, that person may have to lose. And that's where the idea of, is this just? Is this right? Is this compassion? Is it, these are spiritual kind of principles.
Yeah.
That's where they come into play. And that's where I think, and I agree with you, the differences between sports. At the end of a sports game, assuming, there's no fighting, which, sometimes happens, but they go, like right now I'm watching some of these Olympic trial games for the Dream Team. And at the end of the game, they all go and shake everyone else's hand on the opposing team. Like, you may have lost, but you still give that respect. You still like show some love. You don't, you understand that they're there to help you challenge yourself harder, to help you. They're really like they're almost cooperating with you in a way. And it's not, I don't, it's kind of an interesting point.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned like in the Olympics and the US team, or all the international teams that are competing, but at the end they show love. It begins and ends with love, right? That's such a huge point to remember. And that could, I mean, quite easily be applied to business and governments, right? So long as that is the intent going into a business meeting or a business discussion or even a conversation. And you mentioned spirituality, as did I, but I think the word that's even more relevant to everyone, right? Because some people they don't deem themselves as spiritual. Okay. So, and there's nothing wrong with that. The people, however you decide to live your life, that's your choice, right? But everyone at the end of the day, we're all human, right? So that person, like you mentioned, that can't even afford a place to live, that's a human being. And the person who bought his third or fourth home, his or her, they're also at the end of the day a human being. We all go to sleep at night, right? If we can. I struggle sleeping. Or, you know what I mean? Like we're all, as you know, if we're fortunate enough and we're able, right? We all wear our pants one leg at a time. And that it's simple, but it gets the narrative that's put out there makes it more complicated, right? And it's all I feel part of the control or the attempted control of how people think, right? Like you said earlier in the episode today, that, you know, we were all raised on the belief that you want to buy a home, it's a great investment, from our own families, from our own parents, right? Like, or even this, get your college education, it's essential, like, you know. And for example, for my parents moving to this country, right, you know, and being persecuted in Iran for just their beliefs, what I just talked about, you're open to believe whatever you want to believe, that's the humane way, right, to deal with things, cooperative way. By the way, that's a result of unhealthy competition, if you really look at it, right? Religious persecution, just mentality, like persecuting on a mental belief, right? It's all part of a bigger, grander scheme, and you know, that's a whole other conversation. But my point being that, you know, my parents moved here for myself and my sister to have an opportunity at higher education, because that wasn't going to be the case in Iran. So, and unfortunately it's still going on, right? So, and then we moved here 26 years ago, you know. So but that's not for everyone. Not everybody benefits, right? That benefits from going into higher education, right? I know many cousins of my own who are entrepreneurs by nature. Like, that's who they are. Like, they wanted to, right out of high school, get the ball rolling, right, and just start creating businesses. And you know, they succeeded. Some, you know, some didn't, but that was who they are. And at the end of the day, they didn't have a regret. You know what I mean? You don't, if your end all be all is money and how much money you can make, I think that's a toxic way of pursuing life. For me, again, this is my opinion on this, because it's okay to pursue money if you're doing it with, again, we talked about a cooperative mentality, and you're just looking at the financial freedom, quote unquote, as a bonus, rather than that's what winning means. You know, that, I think you said in sports, win or lose the game, they show love. And I think that's the win ultimately for both teams, right? And that healthy competition on the court or on the field, and the audience watching, that's the win, because we are engaged. But when we approach everything in a cooperative manner, there are millions and millions of people who define themselves as non-competitive people, correct? And we know a bunch. There are a lot of people out there who are not competitive, right? So when we look at it as a cooperative approach, guess what? That covers the non-competitive people too, right? Because now you think about, okay, well, first of all, I'm not just thinking about how I am, right? I know I'm competitive, but now, because I'm looking at it as a cooperative approach, through a cooperative approach, now I empathize for the person who's not competitive. But when you only think competitive in an unhealthy way, then, oh, screw that person, they're going to lose, who cares? And it can get really sickening, and it can really kill your humanity. And humanity, spirituality, at some points they are kind of interchangeable, but it's that is where the tide is turning, I think.
I mean, I think the term competition is a bit, the way that we think of it is not 100% accurate. Like you're saying, and like we were talking about earlier, to be competitive is really a desire to make yourself better, right? It's not that you want others to not do well.
Yeah.
And I think that's where that term gets used. It gets used kind of interchangeably in both of these scenarios. So a lot of people, when they kind of say, oh, it's so great to have competition, that's like the driver of everything that is working in our economy, in our world, right? And as Americans, we're the most competitive, and this kind of concept, it needs to be like very carefully looked at, because if that competition if by being competitive you are somehow causing somebody else to be hurt at the end of the day, then that's not actually you. Like, there's two forms, right? You can either be competitive because you're trying to just get better yourself every day, and I totally respect that. I think we all should have that kind of competitive drive. And even people who say they're cooperative, I think they still strive for that too. So I would argue everyone probably has this instinct within them. Like, I think it's part of the human nature to get better. Mm-hmm. The other form is like, I need to crush somebody and get rid of them, because maybe the reason why I want to do that is because I don't think I can beat them otherwise, unless they're out of the picture altogether. Mm-hmm. Or I don't want to be threatened to have to, perform better because this other person might start to do better than me in some things. And so I just need to, kill it off. That's a really toxic way of looking at the world, right? It's a really like egotistical way to look at the world. It's almost as if you presume the world should be, working around what you need. And generally that is, materially. So I think it is a good distinction to make. And you're right. I think competition in that former sense is very healthy and needed.
Yeah. And I think to add to your point, to take it further, it ties into mental health, I feel, when we redefine competition as to, in order for me to be better, I have to be better than them. I think that it could tie into insecurities that we may have, right? I mean, we all deal with different types of insecurities. So, you know, and I know for me, when I was younger, I would look at composition like that and I would compare myself. You know, when you compare yourself to someone else, it's the first step of a kind of like a downhill effort, right? Because it's just you're not going to be happy at the end of it. Because no matter how much let me just put it for myself, no matter how much I compared myself to others and I improved the crap out of my that aspect of my life, I wasn't happier, right? Because my goal wasn't pure. It wasn't I wasn't just trying to be the best version of myself, right? So in other words, because of my insecurity about not being as good at something as that person A or person B, I destroyed myself in the process. And by the time I even achieved that goal to like be at the same level or better, like my humanity was in check, right? I was like, okay, what? Like it wasn't fun, right? It wasn't riveting or exciting. So I think that is a big part of it, man.
Do you know what I think about? You'll like this reference. Do you remember in The Last Dance? So you know the docu-series about Michael Jordan and the Bulls during their great rise and challenging and championship wins and all that.
Yeah.
There was this one part in an episode which I guess I don't remember the team that the Bulls were playing against, but MJ was playing against some random team, and there was some person guarding him, and basically they had like a back-to-back game. So they were playing, tonight, and then they were going to play the same team the following night.
Yeah.
And then, or something, something. Maybe it wasn't the same team the following night, but they played again later on down the year. And then Michael had basically, I guess this random guy scored a lot on the opposing team, and like mentally in his head, Michael had fabricated a story about what had happened during the game. He made up this story that like this player, I can't remember exactly the details. Like he trash talk Michael. Maybe I should say MJ. Michael's kind of weird to just keep saying Michael like first name. Nobody says that. But like MJ like made up this entire story in his own mind about what had happened with that player to be able to amp up himself to like get his competitive juices going, so that the next time down, next time they met that team and played that team, he like went all out and just like destroyed this team.
Yeah.
But he was using this like this story he made up in his head, and I'm trying to picture like how the level of thought you'd have to kind of like bring yourself to like believe this thing you've made up so much that you'd get like emotionally like highly engaged and like be able to muster up tons of energy to bring it on that second game. And it's just funny. I mean, it's not the best, like it's kind of not the best method maybe to get yourself amped up into like performing better. But the fact that it just kind of shows that MJ wasn't competing really with that guy, because he easily could have destroyed that guy, probably every single game he ever played this guy, right?
Yeah.
But he needed a way to make himself think that he needs to perform better so that he could become an even better competitor. And it was like almost like a fuel. But that kind of just shows the real competition is with yourself. It's not with that random loser that he played against, whoever it was. It was literally he was competing with himself to find a way to muster up more energy.
I like how we were going from like, love and cooperate. Oh, that loser. like switched it up so fast.
Well, he was literally a loser.
in the game we're talking.
Yes.
No, man, that's true. But also, we got to think about at that time of Michael Jordan, and it's always like Michael. We all know, we're talking about Last Dance, Chicago Bulls, my favorite team, and it's truly the last dance. They haven't danced since then, so we've been dealing with those subpar years. But anyway, yeah, that you're right on that. You nailed it on the head. But it took him to talk about that moment, right? Like 25 years later or whatever years later it is from the timeline of the 90s when that was, and then when Last Dance came out, and I think 2019 or 2020 came out in 2020. And it's and then you have to also think about, he had the pressure of the entire fandom of the NBA as being the number one, right? So he's dealing with all of that. And then for this guy who comparably, here's a key word, comparably to him, wasn't number one. And then he puts up the points that he does, or he outdoes him in that game. So the pressure combined with him creating this narrative to be able to muster up the competitive spirit and juice to, again, himself being better, right? So, I mean,
he had no competition that was good enough to give him that drive, right? Like when you're at the top, you don't have, like, there's very few people to motivate you to become even better because you're the best, right? So what do you do at that point? I guess you just start making stuff up in your own mind, right? Like you need something that doesn't even exist to exist for you to compete against.
You're right that, he was the best during the time during his career in the NBA. But, there's also a saying, it's the loneliest when you're at the top, right? And the reason I bring that up is because, again, when we're competitive to be the best in an unhealthy way, you can feel that loneliness at the top, right? But when you do it, the real question is, can you, and I believe you can, but when you get to becoming the best, right? Statistically speaking, numbers, right? You become the best, but you're cooperative and you have love, right? For your opponents or for the competition, and you bring them up with you, right? You don't bash them or you don't talk down. Now, Michael was guilty of really putting the thumb down on, he was a trash talker there, and he was, in the spirit of the game. If it comes with love and it's fun and games, it's fine. And he's friends with Gary Payton. He's friends with, all of his competition, Charles Barkley. They jab at each other all the time, but it behind that camera and all of that, it's ultimately, they're all friends and it's love. So, now comparing that to, this generation's, I guess, greatest player, LeBron, and it's debatable. Everyone's always debating it, but I only measure it through who's been in Space Jam. so it's, the two Space Jams, which at the time of this recording, that Space Jam, A New Legacy just came out yesterday, being the, what's today, the 17th. So it came out on the 16th, July 16th. So we're talking right now, it's July 17th. Although this episode comes out, ladies and gentlemen, July 27th. So the topics that we're talking about currently some of the topics may have already come to a conclusion. And I wanted to kind of segue into this. LeBron, he's they always label him as he's too nice, right? They always label him because why? Because they compare him to Michael, right? They compare him to Michael Jordan a lot, or even Kobe Bryant, right? Rest in peace, Kobe. But it was, they call it the killer instinct. Does LeBron have the killer instinct, right? Well, what does that even mean, right? If we're looking at if we're defining the best as having killer instinct, right? Well, I define the best as, okay, how many championships has he won, right? Or how many times has he finished an NBA season as the champion? Okay, he's done it 4 times, but he's also not done yet, right? But like, he also did it on 3 different teams, and one of those teams like almost had no chance statistically of having that championship against, the Warriors. So like, but then they say he doesn't have the killer instinct. That's the narrative that's been put out there. I disagree, and I define killer instinct as winning the game together. He has more assists than Michael Jordan, and I'm a Bulls fan, and I'm saying this, right? It's not, I'm trying to be unbiased and just objectively speaking, right? He's played more years than Michael, of course, but he's also because he's had losses in the NBA finals, they always use that against him. But that's when we just look at wins and losses, and that's it. I think there's more to it than that. And his teammates and Michael Jordan as well. But Michael Jordan had Scottie Pippen, right? And he had a one of the 50 greatest players of all time. He had, Dennis the Menace in he had the Worm, and he had all these great, amazing, like revolutionary players on his team. He couldn't have done it alone, and he didn't do it alone, right? For a long time. It took him a while. He had all those heartbreaks against the Detroit Pistons of the 80s, until the 90s was his decade. LeBron, same thing. He had to get swept by the Spurs. Anyway, the point being, and he got swept by the Warriors on their last meet. So he's had his heartbreaks too, but ultimately, I think you can't really compare them just from a standpoint of wins and losses. They played in 2 different complete eras, and I know we're getting into sports now, and we've kind of walked away from the economy, but I think the bigger topic here is competition and how we look at it. So I think players like Steph Curry, LeBron, I view them as cooperative players. They're competitive in a healthy, cooperative way. Whereas, Kobe and Michael were amazing. But they both have on record said, right, in The Last Dance for Michael, and then Kobe has been recorded as saying that I just wanted, when I would see my teammates not putting the efforts I was putting in, I didn't want them there, right? So, and this could be controversial, what I'm about to say, but that's borderline not cooperative, right? Like the time wasn't put in to understand your teammates. It was kind of like, do what I do and that'll win, right? And we're not, and again, at that high level, the pressure and all that, I understand it can be paramount. Well,
I also think it's not fair for that other player who's not putting in as much effort too, because you could ask them, are you doing what's right? Are you being kind and respectful to MJ, who's putting in like all of his weekend? There's a balance there, right? Like, and at the same time, MJ, probably shouldn't be like, get out of here. He probably should find a better way to do what he does. But I mean, at the end of the day, he's one of the most winning people, so you can't really argue with
Yeah.
his approach, but maybe he could have been even better. Like that's the thing we'll never know, is that maybe if, he tweaked some of the things that he did, maybe he could have been an even more spectacular player, or the team in general could have been even more successful in some ways.
It's it's going to be one of those this topic of, these great superstars of the league, the NBA. It's going to be debated as long as there's time.
I mean, you can't, like, I feel like this is something that everyone is, debated for a long time. Who are the top 5 players of all time? Who's, the GOAT? Who's and like, we're all entitled to our own opinions. There are some like numbers we can like use to maybe make an argument that's more sound, like, okay, MJ has so many titles and this person has so many titles. But like at the end of the day, in reality, if you were to pick some of those great people, like if you picked I don't know, let's say MJ and Kobe, who's the best player? There's a chance that Kobe could have played better one-on-one against MJ.
Yeah.
And we'll never be able to actually know the truth. I feel like it's
just fun to imagine, right? It's just fun to fantasize about it, right? It's kind of like,
right,
like you and myself, we were early teenagers when Michael was at top of the NBA, right? And then by the time Kobe came in, I was like 16, 17. And then, into my, I guess I could say like late 20s, right? He was still in the league. But, his prime was 2009, 10. And then, now we're in our 30s and LeBron is on top of the league. And that's even up for debate now between Kevin Durant and him and Steph Curry. And it's all beautiful though, right? Because I think when we're talking about these fun debates, even that can get competitive in an unhealthy way, right? And it can be beautiful when it's cooperative and it's just out with love and fun, and we're just fun banter and joking. There's a huge pressure that's lifted when we do it that way, right? It's like there isn't any pressure at the end of the day. It's a fun discussion, right? And I think when we forget that, it's when we cross into the unhealthy way. All right. Speaking of basketball and competition, and you, my friend, were an avid Phoenix Suns fan when I knew you in your 20s. And then the Warriors started winning, and granted, you are a fan of them as well. But right now, you're the Phoenix Suns. And Phoenix is where you were born, or what city were you born in?
I was born in Mesa, which is a city nearby.
Nearby, right. So, okay. So we got at the time of this episode, ladies and gentlemen, we are a few hours away from Game 5, which is going to be back in Phoenix. The series is tied 2-2. What are your thoughts on the series so far, and what do you predict for tonight's game?
I haven't, truth be told, seen all the games in their entirety. However,
I missed Game 3, for the record. I didn't watch it.
Yeah, it seems like if I had to say if there's a better team, I would have to say it's the Suns. Mm-hmm. In terms of like they're a better team. They're led by Chris Paul, one of the best leaders in basketball.
Let's see if he bounces back from the last game, though. He played horrible in the last game.
Yeah, well, I mean, the thing is that somehow Giannis has really upped his game. So now it seems like Phoenix doesn't really have an answer for that kind of big man, low post area.
Well, Saric being hurt really hurt you guys. Hurt the Suns, I should say.
Well, yeah, I wouldn't call myself a Suns fan at this point, just because I was more of a Steve Nash era fan and Steve Nash fan in general. But I do like, I really like point guards. I mean, when I grew up in Arizona, there was KJ, Dan Marley, Charles Barkley. That whole team was, almost won. And then, the Bulls prevented that. So I know Suns have never actually won a championship. I think
they have
like the only organizations never won.
Are they the only one? I thought there was a few other teams. Or has every team won a ring?
Sorry, I think they're the oldest running. So like there may have been teams that came after them that haven't won, but
yeah.
Yeah, and then after that, we had the great. I'm spazzing on his name. What's his name? Jason Kidd led Suns.
Yeah.
So and then after that, Jason Kidd kind of mentored Steve Nash for a little while.
Yeah.
So Arizona teams, I mean, the Suns have had like
great
best point guards, I think, of the last, 25 years have been somehow they've all been in Phoenix. So I don't know why that is, but Chris Paul is, if you were to think of the best traditional point guard right now, he has got to be like probably the strongest, like traditional style point guard, right? They're not like one of these Kyrie or Steph kind of point guards where they don't really do a lot of passing. They're more running and driving and shooting.
Playmakers.
They're not playmakers in that traditional point guard sense.
Right. It's true.
So
but also Chris Paul is probably one of the most unlucky point guards.
Yeah.
He's always had unfortunate injuries at the worst time during his 16 years run in his playoff teams with the Clippers and then the Houston Rockets. He was hurt against the Warriors. That was a tough one, man. When they were up 3-2. That's why when he beat the Clippers this year, it was almost like a monkey off his back, right? So
yeah.
Now let's see where they go, man. So what's your prediction? How many more games are we going to get out of this series? It's best out of 3 now.
I think the Suns will probably win.
In how many games?
Probably the full 7.
7 games. So that means they're not winning in Milwaukee.
That means they're not winning in Milwaukee?
I'm saying that means they either have to win tonight and they'll lose in Milwaukee and come game 6.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
Or they lose tonight somehow and then they have to win 2 in a row. So
yeah, they've been a bit exposed for, I don't know what they're doing wrong. I think that it's that low post area that they're kind of struggling with, I think. So they've been picking up a lot of fouls. Devin Booker has kind of,
we
been
can
taken out of the game.
If Devin didn't, by the way, Devin had like 9 fouls in the last game and they only called 5, but it is what it is. But if he didn't pick up the 5th foul by basically decking, who was it, out of bounds for that 5th foul in game 4, he was on fire, man. I mean, we could be looking at a 3-1 series right now, right? But they took him out. Chris Paul couldn't answer, right? And he had his probably worst game of the playoffs this year. And then now we're tied at 2. But we got to give credit to Chris Middleton on the other side, right? He played amazing in that game. They needed him to. Drew Holiday has been a nightmare for Chris Paul, to say the least. He's a great defender. So, and he's putting all his energy on defense right now, full court. He's been covering him. But yeah, man, it'll be interesting.
What about you? Who are you?
So here's the thing. I didn't have a favorite. I'll be happy for Chris Paul, but the way he played in the last game, if he keeps playing like that, I wouldn't be like disappointed if he lost, because you made it this far and you were 2 games away, and if you can't finish the job at this point, it's it's almost like, I mean, he's gonna be a Hall of Famer regardless of what happens, but the Bucks are just it's almost like they know they have the obvious advantages, which is they're way bigger of a team, right? And aside from DeAndre Ayton, unfortunately Saric had the torn ACL. So now it's basically, Phoenix is limited in their players that could match up, between Brook Lopez and you have, Giannis. And you would think that the Bucks would be like, all right, just pound it inside, and that's your advantage. But then they'll go and start shooting threes for no reason, right? And I don't know if it's like I mean, Phoenix isn't even really building a wall against Giannis necessarily, right? I mean, they did it more so in Game 4, but Chris Middleton took fire. So now they have to figure out how to stop Middleton and have a wall. So if Middleton is going to have another one of those games, it might open it up again for Giannis. So we'll see. But I think it would be amazing if it goes 7, because like the 2016 finals, that was probably one of the best finals in a long time. Objectively speaking, I know you're a Warriors fan, but looking back at it, we can argue that it was a entertaining, must-see finals, right? And so we'll see. I say if Phoenix wins tonight, it'll go 7. But if Milwaukee somehow takes this win tonight, then I think it might end in Milwaukee and obviously Milwaukee would win.
I just think Middleton has been a little like on and off.
Yeah, that's true.
I'm not sure why that's the case, and it kind of bothers me about him. And I don't think Giannis, whatever. I don't think he's capable of like winning the game on his own. And not that anyone
he can win one game. I think he can win one game on his own, but he's not going to be able to win the series on his own.
I don't know. I just remember the previous years where we've watched the Bucks, and every time I've seen them play, I'm pretty disappointed at their performance. And like at the end of the day, in my mind, I came to a conclusion that this team is just not like, he's a spectacular individual player. They have several spectacular players, but they just don't have, I think, the intelligence that kind of Chris Paul, I think, will bring into playmaking.
Yeah.
That they probably need. I think they need somebody who's like a Chris Paul to be on that team. Not necessarily as good as Chris Paul, but somebody who's more of a playmaker. And I think they would probably win pretty easily.
I think so too. But I think Phoenix is the better team. But the Bucks, if they actually take advantage of their size, then it's going to cause problems for the Phoenix Suns. But they haven't consistently done that, right? They've done it a couple times, but they haven't, Giannis jacking up threes. He doesn't need to do that. He actually has multiple advantages to driving in, because one, he can get an and one. Yes, his free throws are very unpredictable, but you're putting them in foul trouble, which is this was probably the biggest advantage they can have. Devin Booker getting in foul trouble. Oh, by the way, Middleton should be driving too, right? I mean, he's like a religious mid-range scorer, right? But he has height advantage over Devin, and or whoever's defending him. I think Crowder is on him sometimes, but either way, man, it's turning out to be a healthy competition in the finals.
Yeah.
It didn't start out that way, so I'm going to enjoy it. I'm going to enjoy, however it turns out. I'll be happy for Chris Paul if he ends up getting his first chip, but I wouldn't be disappointed if the Bucks win too, because I don't really, and I think it's more fun watching it this way. I used to pick a team and then I would get all butthurt when it wouldn't turn out the way I wanted.
Every time.
Yeah, exactly. Except in 2016. That was a miracle comeback. So anyway, Mish, thank you so much for being on. Do you want to plug away your Instagram for people to find you?
Sure. Feel free to add me on Instagram. I'm at Mishkin Faustini, so pretty easy to find. Just my full name.
Right there.
And there you go.
Yeah, man.
I post videos about like travel and travel videos and stuff like that. So
yeah, and Mishkin took after his mom in having a hobby of photography. So I know he has some fun photos up as well and videos. So check out his Instagram. Thank you for spending your Saturday with me. I'm sure you could have found many better things to do on a Saturday than stay here for over an hour. So yeah, man. Everyone follow Mishkin Faustini on Instagram, and don't forget to subscribe, like, and follow Fumble Podcast on YouTube and wherever you listen to your podcasts. This was the season finale of season 1, episode 21. This will be released on the 27th of July, 2021. Thank you guys for listening, and I'll see you on the next one. Together we'll purify the mind and have a good time. I'll showcase your very best.